So CNBC is in the business of covering dollars and cents, the bottom line. And I want to start with a very basic question. Why should businesses today care about sustainability, care about climate change? How does that affect the dollars and cents and the core of the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll start not dollars and cents, but then I'll get there really quickly. Most large companies today are serious about climate change, are taking serious steps. And there are two reasons. One is that the extent of climate change is really obvious. Everybody sees it. Deloitte does an annual CEO survey, and 86% of CEOs say that they have personally experienced the effects of climate change and extreme weather. And when you get to that kind of tipping point, it's something that's not theoretical, it's visceral, and people take action on it.
And when did that tipping point happen?
So I can't answer from the data, but anecdotally, it's happened in the past couple of years. And I think that we have acceleration of extreme weather events. We've heard a lot about that at this conference. I think people are seeing that, and that's causing them to take action. And it's people in companies, it's their investors, it's the regulators, it's their customers, it's their employees. They're all seeing this. The other reason to get to dollars and cents is that taking action against climate change is generally good for business. When we put a strategy together for a company, all the projects and all the investments they need to make to get to net zero, 50 to 70% of that generally saves or makes them money, and there are things that they should do even if they didn't care about the environment.
So on the saving money side, that makes sense when you're talking about cutting expenses on energy and that kind of thing.
When you take out carbon, you're taking out waste, you're generally taking out cost.
What about on the making money side? How does sustainability help there?
Yeah, so a lot of the biggest, so the energy transition and the net zero transition is the biggest thing that's going to happen to the economy since the Industrial Revolution. The biggest businesses of 20, 30 years from now are being created today on energy transition. And so those are both, new products, they're completely new businesses, and we're seeing that really across the board in all segments, all industries.
Do you see that consumers care as well, and do you have any sort of specific areas or cases that you could talk about where that's happened?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There is good data that consumers care about sustainability and will pay more for sustainable products. There's a very good NYU Stern strategy or study that has pretty good data. Deloitte did a study with the Grocery Manufacturers Association that looks at food products in particular and finds that most people are buying on something other than taste, price, and convenience. They're buying on a number of other things that often include sustainability. And there are products that are getting premiums because they're more sustainable. And I look at a lot in apparel, the Ralph Lauren green polo, the new circular Nike Air, all great products that are getting a premium for being green. I will say though that expecting consumers to pay more for your product because it's more sustainable is not a good strategy. And so we generally see companies thinking about how the value of their product in a couple of different ways. One is lower cost that we talked about, lower life cycle cost. The other is that just producing better products. We're working with a protein manufacturer, a meat manufacturer that's producing lower carbon proteins through regenerative ag practices. They just taste better, right? The consumers are very clear that they're better, tastier products, and that's why they're going to buy them. And then the third strategy that companies are using is, carbon has value, carbon is an asset, and to find who values that and have them pay for that. And that may be the B2B customer in that situation.
So if you're a business and you're interested in improving your sustainability, addressing climate change, and proving it to investors, customers, and so forth, what are the things that you have to figure out how to measure? Like, what are the factors that go into that, and what do you have to look at? Yeah,
so the biggest thing, data is a problem across the board, and I can talk about kind of what's hardest, but over 70% of large companies have a sustainability goal, have a published net zero goal that they've committed to the public that they're going to make. We did a survey of financial institutions, which I think applies to all companies. It says that only 5% of those companies say that they have the data to be confident that their footprints are accurate and that they're able to meet those plans.
Okay.
And so data is a big problem across the board, and there's a lot of innovation in how to get better.
Right, because you have to measure not only your own emissions accurately, you also have to measure the scope 3, which is the emissions of all of your suppliers and everybody that's sort of feeding into your product, right?
Exactly, yeah. So the data has to be more accurate than it is now, and so it has to be kind of down to the level of a specific product, a specific factory, a specific machine in that factory. The data has to be much timelier, that a lot of companies are doing annual reports, which if you think about it, when that report is out, it's already a year old, and you can't manage with that kind of backward-looking data. And then it has to be transparent, so you have to be able to get data, like you said, from your suppliers, your customers, and pull all of that in. And it's really that, I liked what Tom Steyer said, that we've kind of won the argument, and most large organizations, most people, agree that climate change is happening and that it's an urgent issue for us to address. And right now, it's really the how. So how do we get there?
Yeah, so if you do have this, the 2030 or the 2050 plan, and you have some idea of what needs to be measured, what technologies and what solutions are there that are making this measurement better, easier, more accurate, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so there are a lot of really interesting technologies out there. It's what I spend a lot of my time doing. Deloitte does have a product we're announcing today, actually, called Greenlight, that helps companies set their targets, calculate what their emissions are on an accurate basis, put together the series of investments that they'll need to reach that goal, and then really importantly to optimize those plans, because for most large organizations, there's no one way to get to net zero. There are multiple ways, and the technologies and the costs are changing all the time, and so that ability to optimize is really important.
So what are some of the technologies that are actually used in measurement, and how has that evolved, and how do you think it's going to evolve over the next 10 years? As opposed, we understand how software works, but what are the actual measurement techniques, and how do they work?
So Internet of Things and what you can do with sensors has really, really evolved. We're seeing, and the technology to pull measurements off those sensors. So we're seeing companies put sensors in every building, every room, do sub-metering, understand how to adjust thermostats so that they're not cooling or heating a building when no one's there. It doesn't need to be, or they're not overheating and cooling. They're measuring downtime on machines. If machines are old and they're using too much electricity, they're looking at that. There are really interesting applications of blockchain to be able to measure all of the steps up your supply chain through 6 or 7 levels, and what happens at the mine, and how that turns into metal, and how that turns into a car. Like all of that can be tracked pretty precisely now.
With the scope 3 emissions, if a company is tracking their suppliers, how can they be sure that the suppliers are providing accurate data? And is there a way that you can check that, or that you can help them check that?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. A lot of the applications of blockchain are to make sure that once a supplier reports what they're doing, that they can't change that. And if they report it to one person, that they're reporting to one company, that they're reporting the same thing to other companies. We're also seeing a lot of supplier marketplaces, so suppliers are making that data public, or at least public to all of their customers, so you're getting kind of a single source of truth on the data. And so there's a lot of evolution in how that's happening. It's still a hard area, to be honest, but and one that companies are grappling with, but there's a huge amount of improvement in how that's tracked.
I sort of look at what has happened in the carbon credit market.
Yep.
And, to some degree, there can be a little bit of a wink. We'll say that this is working, when in actuality, if you dig down into it, the trees that are planted burn down later. There's all kinds of fudging. So, how rigorous can these measurements be, and is it dependent on more stringent regulation? How much action do you think that companies are willing to take to really make sure that this information they're getting is accurate?
Yeah, it's a good question. Companies care about reporting actual data and accurate data for reputational reasons. Their customers care about it, their investors care about it, their employees care about it, and often when we're helping companies with business cases, the entire business case can be made just on the employee angle. A company that's doing the right things on sustainability has an easier time hiring people, retaining them, getting them to work hard and be engaged. And so for all those reasons, regulation is definitely going to help. And there's SEC regulation that's going to come out later this year. There's European regulation that virtually all large US companies need to comply with because it's extraterritorial. And what that's done is created an environment in which the CFO is going to have to sign off on their disclosures about carbon. It's going to have to be as accurate, as auditable as the financial data. And you'll potentially see stakeholder or shareholder lawsuits if the data is not correct.
So it becomes a new gap, basically.
Yeah, and it just changes the level of seriousness with which companies, and the level of rigor that companies apply to that data.
So when you're actually talking to companies and a company wants to increase its sustainability, help the climate, what are the areas that are the ripest for improvement, and what technologies are you particularly excited about, bullish about, that they can actually deploy to get there?
Yeah, I mean,
as opposed to just measure.
Yeah, one of the things that's most exciting, and I think that most people in this room probably know about it, is I mentioned at the beginning that 50 to 70% of what a company needs to do to get to net zero generally saves money. A lot of that's been because of the amazing improvements in renewables, both in the availability of renewables and in the cost profile for renewables over the past 10 years or so. Solar power is dropping at about, the cost is dropping at about 10% a year, wind is dropping at about 10% a year, solar power is dropping at 18 to 20% a year for PV. And so we're in a situation where in most cases, for a large company to do a long-term renewables contract, it saves them money, it cash flows positive over time. So that's something that really every company should be doing. And then the other area that's improved a lot is both the availability and the cost of electric vehicles and what's available for corporate fleets with electric vehicles.
Anything on in terms of building improvement and that kind of stuff, heating and cooling? I know there's a lot of waste there as well.
Yep. So building efficiency as well. A lot of the difference is in what I mentioned with sensors, that you can understand on a lot more accurate basis where you're expending your heating and cooling and electricity cost to a level that companies couldn't understand even a couple of years ago. And there are both technologies and there are service providers that will help you manage the electricity that goes in your buildings, help you retrofit your buildings. And a lot of times we're seeing clients save 20 to 30% of their energy costs, which is money that just drops to the bottom line.
When you look at the overall space, what are the biggest barriers? What are the thorniest problems? And one thing I think of is with renewables, there have to be more renewables on the grid and there are structural issues there. But when you look at the overall space, what are the things that are standing in the way or the stuff that's going to be hard to solve? Yeah,
so we're also doing a lot of work with clients. We have a product called Green Space that helps look at what's 10 to 20 years out and what's coming. And the things that are not here yet but will be soon are solutions for long-haul transit for large trucks, maritime transit, which I think we're going to hear a little bit about later, sustainable aviation fuels, which you've heard about the other day, and then manufacturing processes. So there's been a lot of really positive development in things like green steel. You're going to see a Volvo in the next couple of years that's produced entirely with net zero steel, and green cement and some of those other kind of foundational materials are still really interesting progress still to come.
We are almost out of time, so I want to close with one final question. Are you generally optimistic that most companies will make the goals that they've set for 2030 and 2050?
I'm generally optimistic just because, like I said, I've seen so much improvement, even such a change in tone, and then so much of an improvement in the underlying technology just in the past really 2 years, right? So a very short period of time, that I am optimistic that most companies will make their goals. What I'm less optimistic about is are we doing enough overall? And we talked about large companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. There's still a lot of smaller companies, a lot of governments, a lot of individuals, a lot of changes that need to be made beyond that footprint for us to get to where we need to go.
I do believe we're out of time. Thank you very much,
Great,
John.
thank you.